I'm Bob Zimmer, Member of Parliament, today with Tom, Jessea and Wyatt on the banks of the Bulkley River in Smithers, BC. We're talking about the public fishery again today. Many of you have seen our videos down on the Fraser, either in Vancouver or on Vancouver Island, but we're here in the north coast of British Columbia, just talking about the impacts of closures to the public fishery. So let's start with you, Tom. We talked a little bit on the walk down here, just about what it means to you and your family, the public fishery.
Yeah. Well, I've pretty much been born and raised in the north, lived in Haida, Terrace, and now the Bulkley Valley. Fished my entire life, and my children that are now 22 years of age have essentially fished from the age of 4.
Right.
And the fishery and fish and the environment are so socially and culturally significant to us and my family, given our shared experiences, even as young kids. As young adults themselves now, their choices that they're making are to get back to the river and to the northwest, so that hopefully they can carry on that tradition with their own children and families.
Well, and you were saying on the drive up here that even as professions, they've picked professions that really keep them close to the water. It's part of who they are, part of their traditions.
That's correct. My one son is a recent graduate from nursing school in South Dakota. The only place he wanted to work and live was in Haida, and lo and behold, he got a job there and he works as a nurse in Queen Charlotte City. And in fact, he's fishing today.
Awesome.
And he's there alone. He doesn't have a partner or anything like that. And he goes alone virtually every single day to fish, and sends me pictures and videos of the things he's seen and done. And it's what I'd hope for them, and it's inspirational. And I'm hoping that we can do the same for other young families, young people in the northwest, in the province, just like young Wyatt here and his dad Jesse. When I saw actually Wyatt out here fishing, it was emotional.
Yeah, awesome.
It was emotional.
Well, and it kind of is a great segue to what Jessea, maybe talk about Wyatt too, about here you are at the ripe old age of 9 years old, fishing with fly fishing. Not the easiest way to fish as a young guy either. So maybe just talk about your experience, Jessea. We talked a little bit, it's part of your history, part of your growing up too, is being able to fish. So maybe just tell us a bit about your story.
Yeah, well, fishing is a tradition for us. As a family, since Wyatt has been a small boy and since I was a small boy, that's what we do to recreate. We spend time outside together. He's been coming with me since when?
I was born.
Since he was born. We have pictures and video of him, on a baby blanket on the side of the river. Well, our family is fishing and enjoying our time together outside, and it's what we do.
Right on.
And I see those opportunities every year. They seem to decrease, and it's really, really concerning that quite possibly it's going to get to the point where he or myself we're unable to come out and do this anymore.
Yeah,
which is a big concern.
Well, we talked about before we were filming about even locating here as part of your job. You had many choices where you could settle down, but you chose here, and a big part of it was it's pretty obvious why you would want to be here. It's beautiful, right in the heart of Smithers, but that's part of life choices. Is it's not just about catching that fish. Many people think that don't fish, it's just all about bringing that fish home for supper, or just about doing that, but it's far more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. We seldom do we actually bring our fish home. It's more getting outside, and fishing is a part of it, but as far as bringing the catch home, it's not the be all end all.
Right on. Well, let's hear from the star of the show today, Wyatt. So, what do you like about fishing?
Just fun. It makes my family get together.
Yeah.
And be outside a lot.
Right on. Because we talked a bit about you. You do other things too. Tell us about some of the other things you do for fun. As a 9-year-old guy.
I play hockey, I mountain bike, and I skateboard a little bit.
Right on. And you like to fish.
Yeah.
So maybe tell us, what's the biggest fish you've caught so far? Even just like this with your hands, how big or so, roughly?
This big maybe.
Right on. Yeah. So you've got some bigger fish to catch, that's for sure, hey?
Yeah.
So, this part of what brings us out here is some of the closures that have been announced, and I think as people that fish, if it's necessary, we're happy to do what it takes to replenish those stocks, aren't we? But when it's sort of an unnecessary closure, or it's closure based on other reasons that aren't necessary, it affects us and it affects people like you. And there's many more like you in BC that it's a big part of our lives. And we're at Oscar's tackle shop too. That's a business that it helps us do what we like to do. And the people that are affected by the public fishery in BC are vast. I like to say that usually you probably don't know it, but you probably have somebody in your neighborhood that's affected by the public fishery in some way, either directly or indirectly. Either receives an income by it or actually participates in it. So we talked about this before. If the minister was here, and again, I think we're all about making good decisions. That's what we're really just trying to do here, is encourage the minister to make a good decision around the public fishery. Often we hear, commercial fleet is recognized in decisions, and other fisheries, maybe the indigenous fisheries recognized in other decisions, but it's that the public fishery seems to get left out in some of these decisions that are made. If you had the minister here today, Tom, what would you say to her? What would you ask her?
Well, first and foremost, I think conservation has to be the overriding guiding principle.
Yeah.
Second of all, that any decisions that are made are based upon the best available science, and that the social and cultural needs of all anglers are recognized.
Right.
And the importance of that to children, to families, and how it sort of forms the backbone and defines many families. Not the fact that you're going out there fishing, but just as Jessea explained, it's the act of getting outside and all the things that fishing trip encompasses. Right? The time together, throwing rocks, collecting rocks, finding wood, looking at animals, the pressure of the water against your legs.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky, sharing that experience and catching a fish.
And we talked about this, that unique experience you had you had a fish on the line, and maybe just explain that experience, and that wouldn't have happened, or you wouldn't have experienced that had you not been fishing.
About 2 months ago, a friend and I went trout fishing in Terrace, and lo and behold, an eagle came down and tried to abscond with my trout and that I just caught on a fly, and after its 6th attempt to get that trout, it actually got that fish. And I've been fishing my whole life, and as the fellow that I was fishing with, we were awestruck by that, right? And we don't have video of it. Most people wouldn't believe it. That eagle was 10 or 12 feet from my face at eye level for a minute.
Yeah, wow.
It was magical. It was really, really special. And you wouldn't have that if you're staying at home.
Yeah.
In front of the TV, attached to media or whatever.
Yeah.
Those things you'll never forget in your life, and it was neat to share that with you within
5
minutes of meeting you, right? It was that special.
Yeah. And maybe Jesse, just speak to that too, because we talked a bit before the filming too, but even the backdrop here, it was a family's wedding that is in this spot as the backdrop, but it becomes a huge part of what we do as our families, and part of our culture and our traditions, right? So maybe just speak to that a little bit, if, again, with that as a basis, if the minister was here, what would you ask her to do in terms of the public fishery?
I would ask for predictable, sustainable opportunity for the in-river wreck fishermen. The way it stands now, we don't know if we're fishing next week or the week after. Yeah. There is no rhyme nor reason to the decisions that are being made, and it is very unfair to expect families that aren't as into fishing as we are to plan their summers or their holidays or whatever it may be around that chance opportunity. Right. It doesn't need to be like this. It never was before. Yeah. It can't continue.
Yeah, and as we've said in our other videos too, there's lots of fish swimming by in that river, and it's just starting. and especially if you're catch and release. And selective fishing is something that we're talking about a lot. Is no person that fishes is better able to selectively fish than a person with a rod and a reel and a barbless hook.
Yeah.
You can see the species. If it's a species that's at risk, you can easily release it, especially in fresh water, and the survivability is very high. Mortality rates of under 10%. So with that in mind, selective fishing is a viable option, and that's why we believe we keep the fishery open, keep guys like Wyatt fishing until he's not just 9 but 99 maybe, eh? And maybe with a lot bigger fish stories. So Wyatt, just want you to say what is your plan for the summer? Are you still planning? What kind of fish are you still trying to catch out there?
To catch a steelhead on a dry fly.
Thanks you guys for coming out here today, and just appreciate your time, just what you've done on the water too. I'll finish with this though, because this is something that we talked about, but not until now on video. Is we talked about the people that remediate streams and that clean up the garbage along the shore of the river, and it's people that with a fishing rod that do that. It's you guys, and it's, you know, the Wyatt is going to be possibly a wildlife biologist in the future that's working on, you know, helping certain species at risk in that particular river. Who knows? But that's your story, Tom, isn't it? And that's what you're, you really see your family get involved in it at professional level. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks again, Wyatt, Jesse, and Tom, for your time. And Minister, we're just asking you to make a good decision here. There's a lot of evidence to do that. And your decisions affect people like us that just want to fish. So stay tuned. Well, I'm Bob Zimmer, Member of Parliament, today with Todd Scharf. We're on the Skeena River here, just out of Terrace. We're doing some fishing. I haven't been too successful so far, but anyway, we wanted to talk about the public fishery. And many of you have watched our videos. We've been videoing down in the Lower Mainland or Vancouver Island, but we're here in more central along the coastline of BC. And the closures are affecting the public fishery as well, affecting people like Todd that just have a boat and a little business and trying to make a living. So Todd, what needs to be done in the public fishery in the Skeena or in your neck of the woods?
Well, Bob, I think we need access as recreational anglers just to come fish the waters and stuff. You can't have closures, especially running a small business. I've been a fishing guide for 20 years. Have rod days on the Skeena River in northern British Columbia. Had a very vibrant business up here, and then obviously we had some closures with tourism travel and stuff like that. That makes it a little bit tougher to run your business. And then as soon as things start to open up, we get DFO closing access to waters for just to guide anglers. All our anglers, or 95% of them, are all catch and release anglers. So we just want an opportunity to fish the river basically, and not look upon as like we're doing something illegal, even though the river is open to fish. Flynn Row has kept it open. We can target steelhead, trout and stuff, coho salmon, right? We're not allowed to target Chinook, sockeye, those two species of salmon right now.
Right. So we talked about this earlier too, and I think there's a misconception out there with some in that people think the people that fish just want to fish every fish out of the water, and that's quite the opposite. People like Todd, the only way that they can continue fishing is if there's fish in the water. The last thing we want to do is take the last fish out of the water. So I guess coming back to that closure question, is it necessary to have that closure here now?
Well, I think if we want to go farther as Canadians to basically to have a responsible fishery for the future, we have to fish selectively. So right now we're closed to fish for Chinook salmon and other species and stuff like that. And even we can't even target them as a catch and release fisher, which is very low mortality rate. Right. But as of right now, there's nets in the river that are not selectively fishing. And as sports anglers, we just look at the double standard that's getting placed upon us, and we take the brunt of the load of restrictions and stuff. And it basically shuts tourism-based businesses down in Terrace and in the north, which is a huge economy for local businesses for more than just what I do, but the whole economy, gas stations to the guys who are selling eggs to the lodges and stuff. So it makes it very difficult to see, the state of things right now. Yeah,
because we talked about it too, and there's not a lot of people on the water today, but the person with the fishing rod, it's a $1.1 billion industry. it has huge impacts to our province, and I'd say even beyond the financial impacts is just what we are experiencing here today, and getting out in the wilderness and experiencing nature, as seeing a bald eagle just behind us here. And this is all part of the experience, even though, fishing gets us out here, right? So the impacts are a lot more profound than that. But maybe just speak to, we talked about fish mortality, nets versus, catch and release. And we know that the fish mortality rate for catch and release is extremely low with a rod and fish hook. But nets, it's extremely higher. So maybe just speak to that, Todd, if you can.
Yeah, so, with catch and release, fly fishing, gear fishing, we're mandated since a long time, I think 1980s, of single barbless hook. So the fish, basically you're fishing in fresh water, even in the ocean, if you target salmon, it's barbless hook. So single barbless hooks in fresh water. The fish basically is caught, usually netted fairly quickly after a quick fight, and then released into the river with very little harm to it. And there's a sub 5%, or 95%, I like, instead of saying mortality, I like to say there's 95% survival rate.
Yep.
On the fish, right? So there is definitely some mortality. We are hooking fish and stuff like that, but Bob, as you see,
very low.
Yeah, very low, and the numbers, speak for themselves. We've had a catch and release steelhead fishery since like the 90s up here, and the steelhead fishery still is decent. And there we don't, there's not a lot of dead fish that become of the catch and release fishery.
And I think that's the tough part, is what you spoke about, is when you see that the person with the rod and reel is very careful about what catch and release, make sure that the fish survives for another day. And yet we still see nets on the water where we see the mortality rate is substantially higher. And sometimes, again, you want to catch certain fish, but it's the fish that are at risk, the ones that we don't want high mortality rates for. We want to see them back and spawn and continue to repopulate the rivers. Maybe just speak to that.
Yeah, so when a net's in the water, it's not selective fishery. So you might have a small tributary off the Skeena that has maybe 200 coho back or very low sockeye return, and that net fishing in the river can't decipher what it's catching, which mortality run. You can't do DNA samples on a fish that's harvested. There's just not enough data to show which fish are harvested, right? Because the net is indiscriminate, right? So if PFA is a group I belong to, and they're really working hard to have a better, more selective way of fishing for food fish, and to fish in river fisheries and terminal fisheries with pound net fishing and stuff like that, which is a totally sustainable way to harvest salmon for indigenous and for other groups.
Absolutely. So we talked about this on the boat a little bit. Todd, if you had the minister here and were giving her advice, what would you tell her is necessary in the public fishery up here in the Skeena?
Well, as anyone who runs a small business, you have to have a little bit of lead time for stuff, right? So when we book trips, we usually book trips a year in advance, and then we're kind of holding on our tippy toes for clients coming over from all over the world, from Europe, from the USA, from Eastern Canada, to find out if we're allowed to fish, basically. And sometimes the notice we get, is that the notice and the narrative is very negative to the tourism industry in BC. So we might find out 2 weeks before that we're not allowed to have clients that are booked that have already put out a year in advance. So my idea would be to basically have the freshwater fisheries pretty much open for a no-kill fishery. Like, unless there was a serious conservation concern of zero fish, but like the mortalities are so low that there's no reason not to have the fishery open. And then if there is an abundance, to have a slot limit or a specific kind of salmon that's available to harvest.
Right. Well, thank you, Todd, for the experience today. It's been nice getting out in the Skeena. I've driven by it far too many times, coming out to talk about fish and talk about other things on the West Coast. But it's great to be here with Bo. Some of you might not be able to see this in the camera. We'll try and get a shot of it in there, but his faithful dog is sitting on the boat right now. But thanks for what you're doing. I'll finish off with this, though, because I think it's important that we highlight this before we close it off, is that, you're not getting rich by doing this. It's a livelihood. You come up here and do it for a reason, because you love the outdoors. You love just being on the water, love being part of that, I think what I've seen too with people like Fred Helmer and Peter Cron and all these other guys, they like offering that experience to give to other people. It's I call it an enjoyment in the job. It's fulfilling. You're here for that reason. But with the closures that we just talked about, it's forcing you off the water, forcing you into a livelihood that just to pay the bills, you have to do other things. Maybe just speak to that.
Yeah, so obviously we were in, you know, a bit of a COVID lockdown for the last 18 months, and being a not essential service in the tourism industry, we really were handcuffed. So we had, you know, customers that basically couldn't even fish from BC, from the lower mainland, because we had a shutdown earlier in the year. Yeah. And it always seems to time out just when our season starts to get going. There's another restriction, another lockdown. So, you know, instead of just sitting, waiting, you know, sitting there not being able to work, I had to do other options. So I started, you know, pretty much started another business, just importing, you know, a Russian style jet boat, inflatable jet boat from Russia, just to make sure things keep on going. And then the small businesses of, you know, the local communities and of Canada is what keeps the economy going. Right. And to be crippled as like we are, and to have a super low impact, environmentally friendly fishery being politicized, it's very hard to take.
Well, and you know, let's keep going with that, Todd. You talked about your dad getting out here and fishing, and I know it's part of our heritage too. I remember fishing with my grandpa in Manitoba on the Lake of the Prairies, and that was part of our Christmas celebration, was ice fishing, or in the summer we go out on his boat and go fishing. But maybe just speak to that tradition for you. You've been some part of your family for a long time. Maybe just speak to that.
Yeah, like I grew up in the lower mainland BC, and we had a 2-week holiday every year. My dad would take 2 weeks off in August, and we'd go fishing either in the saltwater, or we go up to a couple lakes in the interior BC. Leighton Lake, Tunqua Lake was one of my favorite places, because my grandfather had a place there, and we fished. You know, I learned to trout fish and fly fish at like 5 years old there. Right on. And it was a lot of that learning, early love for nature, getting out there. And just, you know, I remember the first day I came back, and I was so excited because I was up at like 6:30 in the morning to get the first early morning bite, and I come running in and I go to my mom or dad, I caught like 5 fish. And awesome. my grandfather says, no, Toddy, we caught 5 fish. Awesome. Right, and that was just a huge thing. Right from there, it's like I take people out from all over the world and show them a little slice of BC, which is an amazing place to be. We live in the greatest place in the world is in Canada, and it's really tough to see, you know, things, Canadians being shut out of natural resources and just enjoyment. And I wish, you know, all future generations can experience what I experienced growing up.
And I think let's finish with this, because I think what we talked about too, Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the minister, it's the job of that department and that minister to manage the fishery. It's to make sure that it's here for generations to come, so our kids can fish, their kids can fish, and generations after them can. But what we've seen is the Department of Fisheries and Oceans is managing the fishery to zero always. And we have people on the water that know what needs to be done, people like Todd that know what needs to be done, that are actually on the water themselves. And the minister and the ministry really needs to listen to these groups, listen to their advice, hear what they have to say, and then implement what they're asking them to do. We've just seen a new allocation of a bunch of money, but again, we've seen more money to a mismanaged fishery doesn't mean it's going to be spent in a good way. So we're calling on the minister to listen to people like Todd and the Public Fishery Alliance and many members that are associated with that group and other groups like it across BC and really across Canada. And she needs to listen. We need the public fishery to be managed well by Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and much better than it is now. Thank you, Todd, for bringing us out on the water. Beautiful Skeena country out here on the west coast of British Columbia. Overcast day. We saw the fish jumping. We just need to catch 1 or 2 of them. We still have some time left to do that. Yep. But thank you for all your efforts, Todd, and thank you for really being a voice further north for the public fishery in BC. Appreciate what you do. And for all those watching, stay tuned.